the understanding that life is not static and we do not need to have all the answers. Sometimes it is about trusting that next step, even if we cannot see the whole path.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Future Builders podcast by Empowered Liion.
This channel is about guiding you to live a life you desire by integrating your passion into your career.
We want to show you how you can make enough money while doing what you truly love. It is not a myth.
And we are doing this right now. Yay!
Yay!
So, Daniel, have you ever thought about just leaving everything behind, like your job, your house, your whole life, just like, disappearing into the forest and becoming a monk?
I have thought about going for a 10-day meditation session without a phone, but actually becoming a monk, I seriously thought about it last time when I was single, but now since I'm already attached, right? So this might not be my agenda for the foreseeable future. Why do you ask?
Well, I have been thinking about Bjorn Natthiko Lindeblad's story. This guy went from being a top finance executive, living that corporate life, to becoming a forest monk in Thailand for 17 years. Like, who does that?
Yeah, common people won't just do that. Imagine that kind of shift. You are about to be the youngest CFO of a huge multinational company, and instead of continuing down the path, you just walk away.
Exactly, and not just for a year or two, for 17 years, practicing meditation, living in simplicity, following all those strict rules in the temple. He completely gave up on the fast-paced life most of us are so familiar with.
But here's the twist. After 17 years of being a monk, finding this deep sense of inner peace through meditation, he lives that life again, then comes back to the so-called real world. And what happens? He falls into depression.
I know, right? Can you imagine? You'd think after nearly 2 decades of meditating and living so mindfully, you'll be pretty immune to something like depression.
Yeah, and it's like we have this assumption that people who meditate, especially monks, they are supposed to have it all figured out, that they are invincible to things like mental illness. But that's the thing. Beyond's story is a reminder that no one is immune. Depression doesn't care if you are a monk or a CEO.
Precisely. And that's one of the things that makes his story so relatable. After coming back to Sweden, he felt like he had nothing left. No job, no possessions, no plan for what's next. It's like after giving everything away for the monk life, he didn't have the tools to navigate the real world anymore.
And to add to that, not long after, he was diagnosed with ALS, that is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Well, you are from the healthcare world. Can you explain what it is?
Yeah, ALS is actually a progressive neurodegenerative disease that affects nerve cells in the brain and spinal cord. In simpler terms, it gradually weakens your muscles, taking away your ability to move, speak, eat, and eventually even breathe.
It is a brutal diagnosis. And at first, Bjorn struggled to accept it. That is understandable. He would spend his whole life in search of wisdom and peace, and then life hits him with something like ALS. That is not something you can just accept it overnight.
No, definitely not. But here's the thing. Over time, he accepted it, even though it wasn't easy. And that acceptance became part of the wisdom he shared with the world. right until he passed away at 62.
He passed away in 2022, but what he left behind, his teaching, his book, I May Be Wrong, and just his whole approach to life and death that continues to inspire so many people.
It's incredible how he faced the end of his life with such grace, even though the journey there was filled with so much hardship. It just shows that no matter how far along we are on the path, life will always present us with new challenges, new lessons.
And it's those lessons that we are really going to deep into today. Bjorn's life is fascinating, not just because of the choices he made, but because of what those choices taught him and what they can teach us.
So, today we are going to dive into Bjorn's journey, his life, his decisions, and how he went from being a successful executive to living as a monk in Thailand for nearly 2 decades. We'll focus on the story behind his transformation in this episode, and then in our next episode, we'll really break down the key lessons he shared in his book, I May Be Wrong.
Yeah, his story is just too rich to cover in one episode itself. There's so much to unpack. So for today, we will walk through the big moments of his life, how he made such drastic changes and the challenges he faced. Then next time, we will look at the wisdom and practical lessons he offers that we can all apply in our lives.
So, before we dive into that pivotal moment in Beyond's life, let's go back a little bit, back to his childhood. Let's go back a little bit, back to his childhood, because his upbringing actually gives us a lot of context for the person he became.
It is really interesting when you think about how someone's early life shapes them. Bjorn grew up in Sweden and his dad was very traditional, hardworking guy. He had expectations for Bjorn like most parents do.
So, from a young age, Beyond's path seemed kind of laid out for him. His dad wanted him to follow in those footsteps, study hard, get a good job, succeed in the traditional sense. You could say he was being set up for that classic success story.
And Bjorn didn't really stray too far from that plan at first. As a kid, he was pretty academic. He was smart, driven, and did well in school. He ended up studying economics from one of Sweden's most prestigious business schools, which is no small feat.
Right, and by the time he finished college, he was well on his way to a successful career in finance. His family was proud, he said especially. He was climbing the corporate ladder, and by 26, he was already on the fast track to becoming the youngest CFO of a major Swedish multinational company.
But here's the thing, you get the sense that even though he was doing everything right, ticking all the boxes, something deeper inside him wasn't quite fulfilled. I mean, can you imagine being in your 20s on the verge of this massive career breakthrough and yet feeling like something is missing?
Yeah, and that's where this pivotal moment comes in. Bjorn was working in Spain. He had got this amazing job lineup, but it's a Sunday and he's lying on his couch, feeling that heavy sense of dread we all know too well, what he called Sunday anguish. It's about worrying what could happen the next working day, the presentation you have to prepare, and the report you have to submit. Also, thinking about what might your boss tell or react to about your work.
You've gotta wonder what was going on through his head at the moment. Here's this guy, seemingly living in the dream, but instead of feeling excited about the week ahead, he's sitting there feeling weighed down by it.
Exactly. And it wasn't just a fleeting feeling. He had been sensing for a while that something wasn't quite right, that maybe he was on the wrong path, but he had not really confronted it head on until that moment on the couch. That's when everything changed.
So there he is, lying on his couch, feeling the weight of it all. And at that moment, he had just finished reading this book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It is one of those philosophical classics that really digs into questions of meaning and purpose.
Yeah, it's about Eastern wisdom and living a more mindful life, but written in a way that speaks to Western readers. Beyond described it as the light bulb moment where something clicked inside him. He realized that the answers that he was looking for couldn't be found in his career or in material success.
And then came this voice, almost out of nowhere, that said, it is time to move on. It wasn't something he had planned or thought deeply about before. It just bubbled up from inside him.
Yup, he said it was like this quiet but powerful inner voice, something he couldn't ignore. And that's where the idea of intuition comes in. This wasn't an intellectual decision. It wasn't something he reasoned in his way to logic with. It wasn't something he reasoned his way to with logic. It was a gut feeling, or what he called the intelligence of the moment.
It's that feeling we all get sometimes, where you just know something even if you can't explain it logically. And for Bjorn, that was the moment when he knew his life needed to change.
And of course, his rational mind kicked in after that. He started thinking about all the practical things, like what's his dad going to say, how would his boss react. But no matter how much he thought about it, that inner voice kept pulling him toward a different path. It was almost like a quiet certainty telling him he couldn't keep living the way he was.
It's such a powerful reminder of how we sometimes need to trust that deeper intuition, even when it goes against everything we have built. Because Bjorn was walking away from a lot, a great job, financial security, his future career. But at that moment, he knew there was something more important than all of that.
So, after that pivotal moment on his couch, Bjorn made the decision to leave his corporate career and completely change his life by becoming a forest monk in Thailand. And honestly, the transition was nothing short of extreme.
Yeah, the contrast between his life in Spain, where everything was focused on ambition, success, and comfort, and the life he stepped into as a monk is like a night and day. He went from being in meetings and managing finances to waking up at 3 a.m. to meditate and live in simplicity.
But what is really fascinating is how Bjorn not only adapt but thrived in that environment over time. His years in the monastery was about embracing a life that most of us would consider extremely difficult. But for him, it eventually became freeing.
Yeah, and that freedom came from the simplicity of the lifestyle. He had no possessions, no income, and no responsibilities like we typically think of them. Everything he owned could fit into a single backpack. And he even went on this 500-kilometer trip through Thailand, carrying all of his belongings on his back. That journey was a perfect metaphor of how lightly he learned to live.
I love that image. Just walking through the mountains, knowing that everything you need is right there on your back. For him, that was true freedom. He was not weighed down by possession or the constant need to achieve more. He learned to be content with less, and that gave him a sense of peace and detachment from material things.
And then there is the strict routine they followed in the monastery, waking up before dawn, meditating, and relying entirely on the generosity of the local community for food and survival. They would walk barefoot through the jungle to collect whatever food they received, and that was all they had to eat for the day. Plus, they could not eat after noon.
It sounds tough, but Bjorn described how that routine actually brought him closer to himself. He learned to focus on the present moment, on the simple act of walking, breathing, and being. That is what mindfulness is all about, being fully engaged with what is happening right now without being distracted by everything else.
But I want to let you guys to know that it is not easy to do all this. Beyond mentioned that it took him years before he really got the hang of meditation. In the early days, he would just fall asleep during meditation sessions. But slowly over time, he learned to quiet his mind and embrace the present moment.
Wow, I didn't know that. And that's what makes his story so relatable. Even though he made his radical life change, he still struggled with the same things we all do: discomfort, discipline, and finding peace in the chaos. But he didn't give up. He stuck with it. And eventually, those years in the monastery became some of the most meaningful of his life.
And it was not just about mindfulness, it was about humility too. In the monastery, they were constantly reminded of their small place in the larger picture. They bowed to the statues of Buddha several times a day. This act of bowing, something that felt strange to him at first, eventually became a daily reminder of the importance of the humility. It was a way of acknowledging that there is something greater than ourselves.
That is such an important lesson, especially in today's world where we are always trying to be bigger, better, and more successful. Beyond's experience in the monastery showed him the value of letting go of the ego, of realizing that we are just a small part of a much bigger universe.
Exactly. And through all of that, through the simplicity, the mindfulness, the humility, Beyond found a kind of peace and freedom that he had never experienced in his corporate life.
It is interesting because you would think that living under such strict rules and with so few possessions would feel restrictive. But for Beyond, it was the opposite. Those restrictions actually helped him find a sense of freedom because they forced him to let go of everything that was not essential.
It is the kind of freedom that comes from detachment, from not being attached to things or even to your own thoughts, which, as we will see, was a big part of what Beyond learned during those years.
And speaking of learning, one of the most powerful lessons Bjorn received during his time as a monk came from his teacher, Ajahn Jayasaro. It is this lesson that ultimately inspired the title of his book, I May Be Wrong.
Yeah, this one really stuck with me. So there was this night in the monastery, one of those full moon meditation nights where everyone, monks and the villagers alike, would gather to meditate together. His teacher climbed into the high seat to give a talk, and he began by telling everyone that he was going to teach him a magic mantra.
Now, the thing about the forest tradition is that they are not really big on the mystical or magical side of Buddhism. So everyone was pretty surprised. But Ajahn Jayasaro had everyone's full attention.
And then, when he finally revealed the mantra, it was so simple. I may be wrong. He explained that next time when you are about to get into a conflict, or the next time you feel sure that you are right and someone else is wrong, just repeat the mantra to yourself. I may be wrong.
It is such a small phrase, but it carries so much power. Bjorn said that mantra completely transformed how he approached situations. It reminded him to stay open, to be humble, and to recognize that no matter how certain we are, there is always a chance that we could be wrong.
And honestly, imagine if people use that phrase. How many arguments would never even happen? How many conflicts would dissolve if we all just took a moment to think, I may be wrong?
Exactly, and that is what made the mantra so profound. It is a simple reminder of humility and open mindedness. Beyond said it was one of the most valuable lessons he learned as a monk because it taught him to step back, to listen more, and to let go of the need to always be right.
It is funny because we live in a world where being right is seen as winning. But what Beyond learned was that being right is not always the most important thing. Sometimes being open to the idea that you might be wrong can lead to more growth and better relationships.
And that is something we can all relate to, right? Whether it is in our personal relationships, at work, or even in our own self talk, reminding ourselves that we could be wrong opens the door to learning and growth.
Guys, this is extremely important. And the older you are, the harder it is for you to embrace this change because most people would think they have experienced enough of that part of life. But time changes, right?
You are absolutely correct, Daniel. What was correct in the past might not be as useful in today's world, especially when there's a technology or generation change.
So, whether you are in a disagreement or just trying to figure out your own path, that mantra, I may be wrong, is something that can really change your perspective.
And it is such a good example on how Beyond's time as a monk shaped not just his approach to life, but also his relationships with others. He learned to let go of control, to embrace humility, and to be open to new ideas. And that is a lesson we can all benefit from.
Precisely, Belle. For those of you who are listening, this may be the one most important takeaway from this episode. Coming up next, we are going to talk about what happened when Bjorn left the monastic life and had to face the challenges of re-entering the world after 17 years. It was not easy, but the lessons he brought with him made all the difference.
So, after 17 years of living as a forest monk, you would think Beyond had reached this ultimate state of peace and contentment, right? But life had another major shift in store for him.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing how, you know, after all that time in the monastery, Bjorn felt that same inner voice he had heard all those years ago, back when he was lying on that couch in Spain. This time, though, the message was different. It was telling him it is time to move on.
Living monastic life was not an easy decision for him. Imagine, after 17 years of very structured, very disciplined lifestyle, he felt this strong inner pull to re-enter the world. And just like when he left his corporate career, this was not something he had planned for. It was more of an intuitive feeling that he could not ignore.
But even though he had learned so much during his time as a monk, the transition back to society was incredibly tough. He had no job, no money, no plan, and for the first time in years, he felt completely lost.
And that led to something many of us might find surprising: depression. Beyond who had spent nearly 2 decades meditating, practicing mindfulness, and living in peace, found himself battling depression once he left the monastery.
Yeah, it is such an important reminder that no matter how much inner work we do, life can still throw challenges our way. For Bjorn, it was a real struggle. He had no financial stability, no career to return to, and no idea what the next chapter of his life would look like.
Even described waking up in the middle of the night, overwhelmed with anxiety, unable to see a way forward. It was like he had left everything behind again, but this time there was no clear path ahead.
And that is where we see this second major shift in his life. Just like when he left the corporate world, Bjorn had to rebuild his life from the ground up. But this time, the tools he had gained as a monk, patience, humility, mindfulness, helped him navigate through this dark period.
And what is amazing is how he started to find his way again. It was not immediate, but gradually. He began sharing the wisdom he had gained during his monastic years. People were drawn to his story, to his insights, and he found himself invited to speak publicly about his experiences.
That was the moment where he really started to find new meaning. He became a public speaker, sharing his journey and the lessons he had learned along the way. His talks were not just about his time as a monk, but about life, love, and even death. He spoke about the importance of letting go of control, embracing uncertainty, and finding peace in the present moment.
And all of that eventually led to his book, I May Be Wrong. The book is filled with the kind of wisdom that comes from living a life of extremes, from the corporate world to the monastery and back to the everyday world. It is a book about humility, openness, and what it means to live authentically.
But that is not the only chapter of his life that opened up after he left the monastery. Bjorn also found something else that had been missing during his years as a monk: love and companionship. He met his wife, who became a central part of this new chapter in his life.
Yeah, after years of being single, living in a community of monks, Bjorn entered into this incredibly loving relationship. He often spoke about how deeply he cherished that connection with his wife. It was a new kind of closeness, both physical and emotional, that he had not experienced in years.
And it is so beautiful how he described that relationship. Like it was something he never expected, but something that brought him immense joy and fulfillment in this new chapter of life.
So here is a man who went from the heights of corporate success to the depths of forest as a monk, and then back into the world, where he found love, purpose, and meaning in ways he could never have anticipated.
It is such a powerful reminder that life is full of these unexpected turns. And even after years of searching for meaning, Bjorn's life showed that it is never too late to start again, to rebuild, and to find new purpose.
Exactly. For those of you here, this is the heart of Beyond Story. This constant evolution, this willingness to let go and start fresh, no matter what stage of life he was in. It is something that we can all take with us. The understanding that life is not static, and we do not need to have all the answers. Sometimes it is about trusting that next step, even if we cannot see the whole path.
All right. And the next part of Bjorn's life was an absolute surprise to him.
Just when you think Beyond had already experienced the most extreme transitions in life, from corporate success to monastic simplicity and back to the materialistic world, life threw him yet another curveball. In 2018, Bjorn was diagnosed with ALS, or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, a progressive neurodegenerative disease.
Again, ALS is a condition where it weakens the muscles so people would lose the ability to move, speak, eat, and even breathe on their own. It is a tough diagnosis for anyone, including someone like Bjorn.
When Bjorn was first diagnosed with ALS, it was not like he immediately accepted it with grace and peace, even with all his years of training as a monk. At first, he struggled with the reality of it. I mean, imagine being told that you have a terminal illness that will gradually take away your ability to move, speak, or even breathe. This is a heavy blow for anyone to take.
Exactly. Even though Bjorn had spent 17 years as a monk meditating on impermanence and preparing for the idea that nothing lasts forever, this diagnosis was different. It was personal and it was immediate. He described the initial reaction as a wave of disbelief and resistance. All that training could not prevent that very human reaction to hearing such life-changing news.
No. Yeah, it is a reminder that no matter how much inner work we have done, we are still human. Beyond did not just brush off the diagnosis and accept it right away. He went through a period of struggling with it, trying to make sense of how this could happen to him after all the work he had put into cultivating peace and mindfulness.
He even admitted that his first instinct was to resist, to push back against the reality of what was happening. It took time for him to move from that place of shock and resistance to a place of acceptance. His journey with ALS was not just about the physical decline, but it was also about coming to terms with the fact that this was his new reality.
Yep, he talked about after the initial resistance, his years as monk helped him develop a kind of peace around the concept of death. He did not see death as something to be feared or as an enemy. Instead, he viewed it as a natural part of life, something that was always going to come, and something that he could approach with curiosity and openness.
He even started planning his own funeral, which most people would find morbid or depressing, but for Bjorn, it brought him a sense of comfort. He wanted his funeral to be a celebration of life filled with music, laughter, and even some glitter, something that reflected his joyful and light-hearted approach to the end of life.
It is such a refreshing perspective. Beyond knew he was going to die, but instead of seeing that as a loss, he saw it as part of the adventure. He talked about how life is made up of different chapters, and death is just the closing of one chapter before the next begins. Even if we do not know exactly what that next chapter looks like. This is a famous statement he used to embrace always. These too shall pass.
And that philosophy, his ability to embrace impermanence, was a direct result of his time in the monastery. His meditation practice had trained him to let go, not to cling too tightly to anything, whether it was his thoughts, his possessions, or even his life. That kind of detachment helped him accept the reality of ALS with grace.
Beyond's story really showed us that facing death does not have to be filled with fear or regret. His experience was a powerful reminder that we can meet even the most difficult challenges in life with a sense of acceptance and peace. It is not about giving up, it is about letting go of the need to control what we cannot control and finding peace in that surrender.
So, what can we take away from Beyond's incredible journey? For me, one of the biggest lessons is the importance of listening to that inner voice, that same voice that led him from a corporate career to becoming a monk, and then from the monastic life back to the world. It is a reminder that sometimes our intuition knows what we need before we do, and we have to be brave enough to listen.
Absolutely right, Daniel. And there's also the lesson of simplicity. How much freedom Beyond found when he let go of material attachments. In a world where we are constantly told we need more, Beyond's life shows us that we actually need much less to be truly happy. It is about finding joy in the present moment rather than chasing after more things.
And then, of course, there is the lesson of acceptance. Beyond's journey, especially toward the end, was all about accepting life's transitions with grace. Whether it is leaving the monastery or facing his ALS diagnosis, he showed us that life is constantly changing. And the more we can accept those changes rather than resist them, the more peace we can find.
That is really the heart of it. Trusting that even in the most difficult moments, there is something to be learned, something to be embraced. Beyond Story teaches us that life is not about holding on to what we have, but about letting go and trusting the process.
So, whether it is listening to your inner wisdom, simplifying your life, or accepting life's transitions, Beyond's journey is a powerful example of how we can all live with a little more peace, a little more grace, and a lot more trust in the flow of life.
And that is where we will leave it for today. This was part one of our deep dive into the life of Bjorn Natthiko Lindeblad. We have explored his incredible journey from a successful finance career to become a forest monk, and finally, his return to the world and his battle with ALS.
In our next episode, we will shift gears and focus on the valuable lessons Bjorn shared in his book, I May Be Wrong. We will dive into the wisdom he gained throughout his life and how those teachings can be applied to our own lives. From mindfulness to humility, there is so much to learn from his story.
We hope you are leaving today's episode feeling inspired by Bjorn's remarkable life. What's clear is that his journey touches on universal truths about peace, acceptance, and finding your own path, even when it leads off the beaten track. As we continue to explore these profound stories and teaching, I invite you to join us in our journey of self-discovery and transformation. Don't forget, if you're seeking guidance on how to align your career with your life's purpose, make sure to visit our website at www.empoweredliion.com/CFA and take our free career fulfillment audit. It is designed to help you understand where you are in your journey and where you might want to go next. Thank you for tuning into the Future Builder podcast. Remember, every step you take is building the future you deserve. Catch you in the next episode. Stay tuned. Bye.